which there is a question many people carry in their hearts but rarely say out loud. Things they don't bring it up during Sunday service. They don't mention it when someone asks how they're doing. They don't post about it online. And most of the time, they keep it buried deep inside. That the question follows them everywhere. It follows them into the car during the morning commute. Stuff. It sits beside them while they drink their first cup of coffee before sunrise. It lingers in the silence after everyone else in the house has gone to bed. It shows up during those quiet moments when there are no distractions left and they are finally alone with their thoughts. The question is simple, God, why does life feel so heavy? Maybe you ever know exactly what that feels like. Maybe that question has become familiar to you. Maybe you've asked it more times than you can count. Not because you've lost your faith, or because you've stopped believing, but because you're tired, deeply tired. The common tired that reaches beyond your body and settles into your heart. Perhaps you're the parent who wakes up before dawn every morning. I think it's a very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question, but one that I think is very simple. You hit snooze once, maybe twice. Not because you're lazy, please, because you're exhausted. You finally pull yourself out of bed, already thinking about everything that needs to be done. For the bless you. Avoid deadlines, like the grocery list, the kids, the responsibilities, the expectations. You make coffee and stand quietly in the kitchen for a moment before the day begins. That brief moment of silence may be the only moment you have to yourself all day. Then life starts moving. Well, this is packing. The children need attention. Let the emails start arriving. The phone starts ringing. The traffic starts building. And before you know it, you're carrying the weight of another day. Then you work all day. Things, sometimes one job, sometimes two. Well, the job that leaves you physically exhausted. Sometimes a job that leaves you emotionally drained. Sometimes both. And when the workday finally ends, another shift begins. Dinner, laundry, household chores, family concerns, undetected problems, more responsibilities. Let's see if it'll bless you. More pressure. And through it all, you keep showing up. You keep moving forward. Good things I've lost of my commonlies, 182 and somewhere deep inside, there is a quiet question that refuses to go away. How much longer can I keep carrying all of this? How much longer can I stay strong? How much longer can I keep holding everything together? The truth is, many people around you have no idea what you're carrying. They see your smile. They hear your polite responses. They watch you fulfill your responsibilities. But they don't see the burden hidden underneath. They don't see the nights you lie awake worried. They don't see the prayers whispered in exhaustion. They don't see the tears that never make it into public view. Things I've lost in the moments when you feel completely overwhelmed but continue moving forward anyway. Maybe you have a lot most different. Maybe you're not carrying financial pressure. Maybe you have a lot of things I've locked in. Maybe you ever lost recently and a most 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 house that used to echo with conversation. A house that once held plans, dreams, laughter, every other love and shared memories. Now the silence feels different. Sometimes the quiet is so loud it almost hurts. You walk past rooms filled with reminders, photos, memories, laments, pieces of a life you thought would continue forever. You never imagined things would turn out this way. You never planned for this chapter. You prayed, you believed. You hoped, you tried, the other law missed it, and still, somehow, things fell apart. Now there are evenings when you sit alone wondering how everything changed so quick. And if you're honest, there have been moments when you've looked toward heaven and asked questions you never thought you would ask. Good, when were you? God, why didn't you stop this? God, why did you allow this to happen? God, why does this hurt so much? Perhaps your burden isn't heartbreak. Perhaps it's financial pressure. You work hard, very hard. Yet somehow the numbers never seem to work the way you hoped. Every month feels like a balancing act. Every unexpected expense creates anxiety. Every overload, every medical bill. Every increase in cost. Every financial setback. You're constantly trying to catch up. You pray before checking your bank account. You pray before opening certain emails. Things in your life. You pray before answering certain phone calls. Because you already know what they might contain. Another obligation, another expense, another reminder of how much pressure you're carrying. And after a while, the burden becomes more than financial. It becomes emotional. It becomes spiritual. It follows you into every part of your life. You may be sitting at a family gathering while secretly worrying about money. You may be trying to enjoy a vacation while thinking about unpaid bills. You may be surrounded by people and still feel the weight pressing against your heart. Because burdens have a way of traveling with us. They don't stay at work. They don't stay in the mailbox. They don't stay in the office. They come home with us. Things I've lost recently, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you. An aging parent whose health is declining. A child who is struggling. Things I've lost, marriage hanging by a thread.
Somebody passed
Diagnosis
the wood.
that changed everything. Anxiety that nobody sees. Oppression that nobody understands. Fear about the future. Questions with no answers. Prayers that seem to go nowhere. And perhaps the most difficult part isn't the burden itself. Perhaps the hardest part is feeling like you're carrying it alone. Or watching other people move forward while you remain stuck. You see someone celebrating a promotion, someone buying a new home, someone sharing exciting news, someone talking about answered prayers, someone wanting to see if enough running. And if you're not careful, a painful thought begins creeping into your mind. Why does life seem easier for them? Why are doors opening for them? Why are prayers being answered for them? Why do they seem to be moving forward while I feel stuck in the same place? Why does it feel like everyone else is making progress while I'm simply trying to survive? Then life feel heavier for me. Does God allow faithful people to carry such difficult burdens? Those are not questions asked by weak people. Things I've lost, questions asked by weary people. They are questions asked by people who have been fighting battles for a long time. People who have remained faithful through disappointment. People who have continued praying through uncertainty. People who have continued believing even while carrying burdens they never expected. Things in your life. The reality is that many believers wrestle with these thoughts. Not because they don't love God. Not because they don't trust Him. But because they're human. Sometimes the burden lasts longer than expected. Sometimes the waiting stretches further than expected. Sometimes the silence feels louder than expected. And in those moments, even faithful people can begin to wonder, could you feel me? God, do you know how tired I am? God, do you understand what this feels like? If I get forgotten about me. Perhaps that's where you are right now. You still love God. You still pray. You still believe His promises. Yet there are moments when you're confused. Moments when you're weary. Moments when your heart feels heavy. Moments when you're carrying responsibilities that seem larger than your strength. Moments when the burden feels greater than your ability to handle it. And perhaps nobody around you knows. You've become skilled at hiding it. You've learned how to smile while struggling. You've learned how to encourage others while feeling discouraged yourself. You've learned how to say, I'm going to list a couple of things I've lost recently and I'm going to see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost those prints for amount of blanket? But what if there is another way to view the weight you're carrying? What if the burden is not evidence that God has abandoned you? What if the pressure is not proof that God is angry with you? What if the struggle is not punishment? What if it is preparation? What if the very thing you've been asking God to remove is actually shaping you into the person He created you to become? What if God sees something in you that you cannot yet see in yourself? Then look, it's throughout Scripture. We see this pattern again and again. Several things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost money? You carried loneliness. Before Joseph ruled Egypt, he carried betrayal. Before Moses led a nation, then you carried decades of obscurity. The loss before Esther stepped into purpose. She walked through uncertainty. Before Jesus entered public ministry, he endured seasons of testing. Again and again, God allowed preparation before promotion, development before destiny, process before purpose. You ever allowed them, and maybe he is still working the same way today. And maybe the burden you're carrying is not the end of your story. Or maybe it is the beginning of something you cannot yet see. Maybe God is building strength beneath the surface. Maybe he is developing faith that circumstances cannot shake. Or maybe he is creating capacity for a calling you have not yet discovered. Maybe years from now you will look back and realize something that seems impossible to see right now. A thing that almost broke you. The thing God used to reveal who you really are. Because sometimes the greatest mistake we make is assuming the weight has no purpose. Sometimes the greatest misunderstanding is believing the burden means God is absent. What if the weight has been serving a purpose all along? What if the struggle has been preparing you for something greater than you can currently imagine? What if the very thing you are begging God to remove is the very thing he is using to reveal who you really are? If you live long enough, there will be a season of your life that changes you. And I'm going to see if it'll bless you. That can simply challenges you. Not a season that merely inconveniences you. A season that reaches so deeply into your heart that when it's over, you are no longer the same person who entered it. People can remember that season immediately. They don't have to think very hard. The memories are still there. The emotions are still there. The details may have faded around the edges. The feeling remains. Recently, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you, you remember what it felt like to wake up every morning with a heaviness already waiting for you. You remember what it felt like to carry burdens nobody else fully understood. You remember how difficult it was to explain the weight you were carrying because words never seemed big enough. Maybe when you look back now, you realize there was a period of time when you were functioning on the outside while quietly falling apart on the inside. People saw you going to work. People saw you showing up. People saw you smiling. People saw you handling responsibility. But they didn't see what was happening beneath the surface. Things I've lost recently, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you, can be one of the most frustrating things in your life. They didn't see the uncertainty. They didn't see the tears. They didn't see the prayers whispered late at night after everyone else had gone to sleep. There are seasons that almost break us. And sometimes they arrive without warning. One day life feels normal. The next day everything changes. Perhaps it was a career setback. Maybe you ever lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Maybe you spent years building something. Years investing your energy. Well, believing your hard work would eventually create stability. You sacrificed weekends. You missed family events. You stayed late. You showed up early. You carried responsibilities other people avoided. You convinced yourself that if you just worked a little harder, things would finally come together. Then suddenly something happened. Bless you. The company changed direction. Then the position disappeared. The business struggled. The opportunity you had counted on vanished. And in a single moment, these years of effort seemed uncertain. Question, you remember sitting quietly after receiving the news. You remember staring at your computer screen. You remember driving home in silence. You remember trying to act strong while your heart was filled with questions. What now? How am I supposed to recover from this? That are things I've allowed those years. Why would God allow this door to close? Sometimes the pain wasn't even about the opportunity itself. Sometimes it was about the dream attached to it. The future you imagined. Just the life you pictured. Stuff we hoped it would provide. Things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it felt as though part of you disappeared with it. Perhaps your difficult season involved finances. Mine, I want to actually have been knocked for a few weeks. For years, the kind of financial pressure that follows you everywhere. You think about it when you wake up. You think about it while you're working. You think about it while you're eating dinner. You think about it when you're trying to fall asleep. It becomes the background noise of your life. A constant concern, a constant calculation, it's a constant pressure. You remember checking your bank account before buying groceries. You remember standing in store aisles, comparing prices. You remember postponing purchases. You remember telling yourself, maybe next month, trying to protect your children from worries they were too young to understand. Trying to protect your spouse from fears you weren't sure how to explain. Trying to be funny positive when everything inside you felt uncertain. There is something exhausting about living in survival mode. When every decision feels important. When every dollar matters. When every setback feels larger because you're already stretched thin. Eventually the burden becomes more than financial. A couple of things I've lost recently and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost? It becomes spiritual. It begins asking questions that have nothing to do with money. Questions like, am I failing? Will things ever get better? But why does it seem like everyone else is moving forward while I'm stuck? And perhaps the hardest seasons are the ones involving people. Because financial losses hurt. Career disappointments hurt. But betrayal has a unique kind of pain. It cuts differently, it lingers differently. Maybe someone you trusted deeply let you down recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Maybe someone you supported turned against you, who lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Bij die Benris Kennemad Leds Imwitty, the spreads on the Prema. So you replay conversations in your mind. So you revisited memories. Let you search for answers. You look for signs you might have missed. Sometimes you blamed yourself. Sometimes you blamed them. Sometimes you simply sat with confusion. Because betrayal creates wounds that are difficult to explain. Things aren't lonely what happened. Pain is who it happened through. The person you trusted became the source of your heartbreak. And if we're not careful, those experiences can begin shaping the way we see ourselves. A person leaves and we start questioning our value. The loss ends and we start questioning our worth. Someone rejects us and we start questioning whether we're enough. That is one of the cruelest things pain does. It tries to convince us that another person's choices determine our identity. But they don't. Still, in the middle of heartbreak, the truth can feel very far away. For others, the season that almost broke them involved family, not the family they hoped for. The family they actually had. The arguments, the misunderstandings, but a tension that never seemed to go away. A child who stopped calling. The sibling relationship that fell apart. The parent whose health slowly declined. The marriage that became difficult. The loved one making destructive choices. The years of praying. The years of hoping, the years of waiting. Family burdens can be especially heavy because they never fully leave your heart. You can leave work at the office, as leave and leave certain responsibilities behind. But you carry family concerns with you everywhere. A parent listening right now understands exactly what that means. You may be smiling during the day while silently worrying about your child. You may be sitting in church while carrying concerns nobody around you knows about. You may be laughing during a family gathering while your heart is secretly burdened by someone you love. Those struggles are real. Those tears are real. Those prayers are real. Then there are the unanswered prayers. Those are some of the most difficult burdens of all. Because unanswered prayers create a kind of loneliness that is hard to describe. God can answer. You've seen him answer before. Hopefully you've heard testimonies. You've read the scriptures. You know he has power. The question isn't whether he can. The question becomes why he hasn't. You prayed for healing. Prayed for restoration. Prayed for provision. You prayed for reconciliation. You prayed for direction. Prayed faithfully. You prayed sincerely. You prayed when you felt strong. Prayed when you felt weak. You prayed when you felt hopeful. We bled when hope was all but gone. And still the answer seemed delayed. Month after month, year after year. The silence continued. Something. And somewhere deep inside, have you ever lost? A painful question began to surface. Did God forget about me? Most believers don't like admitting they've asked that question. Yet many have, not because they lack faith, because they stop loving God. But because prolonged waiting can test even the strongest heart. You continue serving. You continue attending church. You continue encouraging others. Yet privately you wonder, God, do you still see me? Do you know what I'm carrying? Do you understand how tired I've become? The truth is, some of God's greatest servants wrestled with those same emotions. Think about Joseph. God gave him a dream when he was young. A dream filled with promise. A dream filled with purpose. A dream that pointed toward a remarkable future. But after receiving that dream, Joseph's life seemed to move in the opposite direction. His brothers betrayed him, threw him into a pit. They sold him into slavery. He was falsely accused. He was forgotten in prison. Things I've lost. Imagine sitting in that prison year after year. Imagine remembering God's promise while staring at prison walls. I've been wondering if the dream had been real at all. Things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you, can be one of the most frustrating things in your life. Not for a single day, for a single moment. While Joseph thought he was being forgotten, God was developing him. While Joseph thought his life was delayed, the questioned him. The prison was not proof that God had abandoned him, for the prison was part of the process. The same was true for David. David was anointed king. Imagine that. God's promise had been spoken over his life. Yet instead of immediately stepping into a palace, David spent years hiding in caves, running from danger. You ever lost sleeping in uncomfortable places? Recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. The confusion, anointed as king, living like a fugitive, chosen by God, yet hiding in darkness. Still, God had not forgotten David. The cave was not a mistake. The cave was preparation. And then there was Moses, 40 years in the wilderness, 40 years of obscurity, 40 years where it seemed as though nothing significant was happening. Yet God was shaping a deliverer. God was preparing a leader. God was building a man capable of carrying the assignment ahead of him. Again and again, Scripture reveals the same truth. All the things I've often develops people in hidden places before revealing them publicly. And I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Can be one of the most frustrating things in your life. Who develops faith before promotion, develops depth before visibility. The challenge is that hidden seasons rarely feel valuable while we're living through them. They feel frustrating, they feel lonely, they feel confusing, they feel unfair. Many people quit during these seasons because they misunderstand what God is doing. They assume that delay means denial. They assume the silence means abandonment. And they assume the struggle means failure. Question, but what if the process is accomplishing something greater than we realize? What if God is building something inside us that comfort never could? A couple things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost those? We can finally see what we couldn't see then. The seasons we would never choose became the seasons that shaped us the most. Pain taught us dependence. Waiting taught us patience. The disappointment taught us humility. The loneliness taught us intimacy with God. The struggle taught us perseverance. Then I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Can be one of the most frustrating things in your life. For the process taught us faith. Comfort never could have taught. Lessons success never could have produced. Lessons that eventually became part of the person God was creating us to be. And maybe that's the truth about your season too. Maybe what almost broke you wasn't meaningless. Maybe God was doing far more than you realized. Maybe while you thought the weight was crushing you, God was quietly building you. And perhaps one day you'll look back and discover that those difficult years taught lessons comfort never could. One of the most polarizing things about difficult seasons is that we rarely understand them while we're living through them. When you're in the middle of the struggle, all you can see is the struggle. Things have you ever lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost the life all you can feel is the burden? When you're trying to survive another day, another week, another month, it's hard to imagine that anything good could possibly be happening beneath the surface. You want to getting through. You focus on paying the bills. Things on keeping your family together. Focus on making it to tomorrow. And honestly, that's understandable. Because pain has a way of narrowing our vision. For things I've lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you, can be one of the most frustrating things in your life. You don't spend much time analyzing the deeper meaning of the hurt. You just want relief. You want answers. You want peace. You just want God to change the situation. You want the pressure to stop. You want the burden lifted. Granted, most of us would choose comfort if given the opportunity. Most of us would choose certainty over waiting. Or most of us would choose ease over struggle. But looking back years later, many people discover something they never could have understood at the time. The weight was doing more than hurting them. The weight was changing them. Lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you? Have you ever lost recently? The burden was shaping them. The struggle was doing more than testing them. And the struggle was preparing them. At the time, it felt like life was taking something away. In reality, God was placing something inside them. Something deeper, something stronger, something that could not have been developed any other way. Think about how life changes us through pressure. That person can read books about patience, but patience becomes real when you are forced to wait. The person can hear sermons about trust. The trust becomes real when you have no idea how things will work out. Then they can talk about faith. But faith becomes real when circumstances give you every reason to quit believing. Some lessons can be taught. Other lessons must be lived. And many of the most valuable lessons in life are learned in seasons we never would have chosen for ourselves. Think about gold for a moment. Before gold enters the fire, it already has value. The fire doesn't create the gold. The gold is already there. The fire simply reveals what does not belong. It exposes impurities that could not be seen before. So the process is intense. That means I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost these things that's transparent? Our process is not pleasant. Yet the result is something stronger, something pure, something more refined. In many ways, difficult seasons work exactly the same way. Pressure reveals things we didn't know were there. Pressure reveals fears that comfort hides. Pressure reveals insecurities we have ignored. Pressure reveals where our trust actually lives. When everything is going well, it's easy to think we trust God completely. It's easy to feel confident. It's easy to feel secure. But when life suddenly becomes uncertain, something deeper is revealed. We discover what we've really been depending. Sometimes we've been depending more on our savings than on God. Sometimes we've been depending more on our plans than on God. Sometimes we've been depending more on our abilities than on God. Then circumstances change. The savings shrink. The plans fail. The abilities are no longer enough. And suddenly we find ourselves reaching for God in a way we never have before. Then I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. And many people discover their deepest prayer life during their darkest season. Because they suddenly became more spiritual. Because they suddenly became more aware of how much they needed Him. They stopped treating prayer like a routine. Prayer became survival. Prayer became oxygen. Prayer became the place where they poured out their fears, frustrations, tears, and hopes. Some of the most honest prayers are prayed by exhausted people. Some of the most powerful prayers are prayed by people who have run out of options. I'm gonna list a couple of things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost this? The weight creates dependence. And dependence on God is not weakness. It is strength, real strength. The kind of strength that remains when everything else falls apart. Maybe you remember a season when you had nowhere else to turn. A season when your own wisdom wasn't enough. A season when your own strength wasn't enough. I'm the season when your own resources couldn't solve the problem. And somehow in that difficult place, you're the most frustrated thing, the God you heard about. The God you experienced. God who comforted you. The God who sustained you. God who carried you when you could barely carry yourself. The weight was producing dependence. But that wasn't the only thing it was producing. And that we spoke about producing maturity. You have a big difference between believing in God when life is easy and trusting Him when life is hard. It's easy to praise God when prayers are being answered exactly the way we hoped. It's easy to celebrate when doors are opening. It's easy to rejoice when everything seems to be working out. But mature faith is developed when the answer doesn't come immediately. It continues trusting even when understanding is absent. Mature faith says, I don't know what God is doing, and I still believe He's working. Mature faith says, I don't understand this season, but I trust the one leading me through it. I love a long time that mature faith says, I can't see the entire picture, but I know God can. That kind of faith is not built in comfort. It's built in waiting. It's built in uncertainty. It's built in seasons when you keep walking forward without seeing the destination. The wait was teaching endurance. All the wait was teaching perseverance. Plus, the wait was teaching you how to remain faithful when life became difficult. It was also developing compassion. And many people become softer because of suffering. So they're not weaker, softer, more understanding, more patient, more aware of other people's pain. Before your difficult season, you have a loss, empathize with people. Through your difficult season, you empathize with them. You stop offering simple answers to complicated pain. Here's a couple things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost? You learn how to sit with hurting people, learn how to listen. You learn how to care, because suffering gave you something comfort never could. Understanding, and perhaps one of the greatest gifts hidden inside the burden, was wisdom. Not information. Wisdom. There is a difference. Information tells you what to do. Wisdom teaches you how to live. Wisdom comes from experience. Wisdom comes from mistakes. Wisdom comes from disappointment. Wisdom comes from surviving things you once thought would destroy you. One day someone will come to you carrying the same burden you once carried. And what you learned during your difficult season will become a gift to them recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Home experience will become encouragement. It will become hope. Finally, the wait was producing humility. Humility isn't weakness. Humility is perspective. It's recognizing that every good thing ultimately comes from God. Understanding how much we truly need Him. It's realizing that success is not self-created. It's remembering that grace has carried us further than our own strength ever could. Looking back now, perhaps you can see what was really happening. The burden was not meaningless. Pressure was not pointless. Could bless you. Have you ever loved that one day and in West Workle School? Purpose is rarely discovered in comfort. Purpose is often revealed in pressure. Just like a seed grows underground before it ever breaks through the surface. God often develops people in hidden places before revealing what He placed inside them. So the roots grow first. The visible growth comes later. And perhaps the same thing has been happening in your life. The burden has been developing capacity. The struggle has been building strength. The pressure has been preparing you for something larger than you can currently see. And one day you may look back and realize the struggle wasn't trying to destroy you at all. It was trying to strengthen you. Most people don't think about that when life is going well, when everything is working. That's a couple things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. You have a job, you have a routine, you have plans, you have goals, relationships, things that make you feel secure. A life feels stable, predictable, comfortable, but then something happens. A door closes, a relationship changes, a dream falls apart, a diagnosis arrives. A loss occurs, and suddenly life begins stripping away things you thought would always be there. You put it in the ether, question emerges. Who am I now? Not who was I when everything was working. And I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever known that people applauded me? And not who was I when life made sense. Who am I now? That question can feel frightening. Oh, our career, our achievements, our income, our appearance, our reputation, the opinions of others, the things I've lost mean though I'm faintly wrong. The problem comes when they become the foundation of our worth. Because eventually life has a way of shaking every foundation that is not built on truth. Maybe there was a time when your confidence came from your success. You felt valuable because you were accomplishing things. You felt secure because people respected you. You felt important because others needed you. Then life changed. The success disappeared. Your recognition faded. The opportunities slowed down. Then you were forced to ask questions you never needed to ask before. What am I without all of that? Am I still valuable? Do I still matter? Things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Pain has a way of stripping away false confidence. It removes the things we relied on. Things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you, where we attached our worth to temporary things. And while that process can be painful, it can also be incredibly freeing. God never intended your identity to be built on things that can be taken away. He intended your value to rise and fall with your circumstances. He never intended your worth to depend on your performance. Many people spend years chasing approval. Someone an X sentence. Sitter laden te se het voorstellen made sedate. Onze staat made specific trying to become enough for everyone around them. Some spend decades doing it. They work harder, achieve more, sacrifice more, perform better, because they hope one day they'll finally feel secure, finally feel accepted, finally feel valuable. But human approval is a moving target. No matter how much you achieve, someone will always expect more. And no matter how much you accomplish, someone will always have another opinion. And no matter how hard you try, you cannot build a stable identity on unstable opinion. And adversity exposes that reality. The applause fades, the attention shifts, the crowd moves on. And suddenly God's voice becomes louder than the voices you spent years trying to impress. That is one of the hidden gifts of difficult seasons. Force us to decide whose opinion matters most. The world's opinion or God's opinion. Fire also exposes our dependence on validation. Many people spend years asking silent questions. Am I enough? Am I lovable? Do I matter? Am I valuable? Will anyone choose me? Will anyone stay? Those questions often become louder after disappointment. I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Or failure. But God answers them differently than the world does. Cindy, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. The says your worth was established before you ever performed. But the world says your value comes from success. God says your value comes from being His. And the Full says prove yourself. God says I already chose. The world says earn your worth. God says your worth was never for sale. And often it's during painful seasons that people finally begin hearing those truths clearly. Because pain removes distractions. See, but pain removes illusions. Pain removes the masks we hide behind. The molest you, we're left face to face with something deeper. The truth about who we really are. Not who fear says we are. But not who failure says we are. Not who rejection says we are. Not who disappointment says we are. I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Where shame says unworthy, God says beloved. Where failure says defeated, then's redeemed. Where fear says incapable, I'm a lost wretch, God says called. Where the world says not enough, God says created with purpose. Many believers know Jesus as Savior. They know He forgives sins. They know He gives grace. They know He offers eternal life. But far fewer understand the identity they have because of Him. Far fewer understand what it means to be secure in God's love. So then be secure in God's acceptance, being secure in God's purpose. Pain often becomes a classroom where those truths are learned. Because pain removes the masks that success allows us to wear. Success can hide insecurity. Success can hide fear. Just a couple things can hide wounds. But adversity exposes them. And once they're exposed, healing can begin. God begins rebuilding identity on a stronger foundation. Achievement, not applause. Not possessions, not popularity. Truth. The truth that you are loved. The truth that you are chosen. Do you see if it'll put in fit you belong to Him? Feeling the truth that your purpose existed long before your struggle arrived. The truth that your calling survived every disappointment and things in your life. The truth that your identity remains secure even when circumstances change. And eventually you discover something remarkable.
The fire didn't just reveal your weakness.
It revealed God's strength. Just a couple things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. It uncovered truths that could never be taken away. And when everything else was stripped away, God's voice became clearer than ever before. There comes a moment in many people's lives when they begin looking back instead of only looking forward. For years they ask questions like, why did this happen? Why did God allow that? Why was that season so painful? Why did I have to go through all of that? Then one day, often much later, they begin seeing something they could not see while they were living through it. Burden wasn't just a burden. So that the struggle wasn't just a struggle. The pain wasn't just pain. Somehow, hidden beneath all of it, there was purpose. There was preparation. There was a calling taking shape. At first, that idea can sound strange. Guys, when you're in the middle of suffering, purpose is usually the last thing on your mind. Question, running for our gun, thinking about destiny. When you're overwhelmed and struggling financially, when you're not thinking about ministry. When you're grieving, when you have a loss recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. After you're thinking about influence, you have a loss recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost one? You're trying to make it through the day, trying to keep going when every part of you wants to quit. Yet over and over again, life reveals a surprising truth. Many of the people God uses most powerfully are people who have walked through deep pain. Not because God enjoys seeing people suffer. Not because suffering itself is good. But because God has an incredible ability to redeem what He allows. He can take the very thing that wounded you and use it to help heal someone else. He can take the thing that almost destroyed your faith and turn it into a testimony that strengthens another person's faith. He can take the burden you hated carrying and transform it into part of your purpose. Think about someone who spent years trapped in addiction. There was a time when they felt hopeless, a time when they made promises they couldn't keep, a time when shame followed them everywhere they went, a time when they believed freedom might never come. Every day felt like a battle. Every victory felt temporary. Every failure felt devastating. But then something began to change, little by little, one day at a time. One step at a time, healing began, growth began, freedom began, and years later, that same person finds himself sitting across from someone who feels trapped exactly the way they once felt trapped. Now their words carry weight, not because they memorized a sermon, not because they read the right books, because they have lived it, because they know what it feels like, because they remember the darkness, because they remember the struggle, because they remember crying out to God when they thought nobody understood. Suddenly, I'm to see if a plane becomes useful. And when lost words become meaningful. Very simple question, but one about some the burden reveals part of the calling. The same thing often happens through grief. Some people listening right now have experienced losses that changed them forever. You remember where you were when you received the phone call. You remember the hospital room. Or do you remember the funeral service? You remember driving home afterward. You remember the strange feeling of returning to normal life when nothing felt normal anymore. You remember waking up the next morning and realizing the pain was still there. You remember looking at an empty chair, an empty room, an empty place at the table, and wondering how life could continue. Those are not easy memories. Those are not small wounds. Those are life-changing experiences. But somewhere in the middle of the grief, God began teaching you things. Not lessons you would have chosen. Lessons you desperately needed. You learned that His presence can sustain people through impossible pain. You learned that comfort can come in unexpected ways. You learned that God stays close to broken-hearted people. Have you ever learned that even when your strength disappears, His strength remains? Then one day someone else experiences loss. When then suddenly God uses your story. Not because you have perfect answers. Not because you figured everything out. But because you walked that road. You understand the tears. I didn't want to be, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you. You understand the questions. And your presence becomes healing. Not because you're extraordinary, because your burden prepared you. Then this pattern appears over and over again. The person who survived financial hardship often develops compassion for struggling families. Thing you lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost from the depression, learns how to recognize hidden pain in others? The person who overcame fear becomes a source of courage. The person who endured rejection helps others discover their value in Christ. The person who walked through divorce helps others survive heartbreak. The person who experienced loneliness becomes the one who notices people nobody else sees. The burden becomes a lens that changes how you see people. It changes what captures your attention. It changes what breaks your heart. And often the things that break your heart reveal the things God is calling you toward. Have you ever noticed that some burdens stay with you long after the season ends? Not the pain itself, the compassion. Things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Gonna concern the awareness. You begin noticing struggles that other people overlook. You begin caring about people that others ignore. You begin feeling drawn towards certain problems, certain needs, certain hurts. That may not be accidental. That may be one of the ways God reveals purpose. Many people spend years searching for their calling while overlooking the clues hidden inside their own story. They think purpose will arrive through a dramatic announcement, the lightning bolt, a clear voice from heaven, sudden revelation. Sometimes purpose is hidden inside the burden you've already carried. Sometimes your greatest struggle points directly toward your greatest assignment. Sometimes the people God has called you to help are the people who are facing battles you once faced yourself. This is why so many powerful testimonies begin with pain. Things in your life. Not because pain is the goal, but because redemption is. God takes broken pieces and creates something beautiful. God takes wounds and creates wisdom. God takes tears and creates testimony. God takes burdens and creates purpose. Think about Joseph. The betrayal he experienced nearly ruined him. At least that's how it looked. His three brothers sold him. People lied about him. Others forgot him. Years of his life seemed wasted. Yet later Joseph discovered something incredible. The very experiences he hated were helping prepare him for the position God had planned all along. The prison wasn't separate from the purpose, but the prison helped prepare him for it. And the same was true for David. The caves were painful, but waiting was painful. The uncertainty was painful. But those difficult years developed the heart of a king. It became preparation. The struggle became training. The hardship became part of the calling. And perhaps the same thing is happening in your life. Maybe the burden you've carried has not been meaningless. Maybe the struggle has not been wasted. Rather, the pain has been shaping something larger than you realize. Because your greatest pain may reveal your greatest assignment. Your deepest wound may point toward the people God has called you to serve. And one day you may discover that the thing you once begged God to remove became the very testimony He used to change lives. If you followed Jesus for any length of time, you probably prayed a prayer that sounded something like this. God, please take this away. Maybe you ever lost recently, and I'm see if it bless you. Have you ever lost one? Maybe you ever lost and you prayed it through tears. Maybe you ever lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost and you ever lost recently? Maybe you ever lost, 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 maybe you ever lost recently. So the things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost? Take away the pain, take away the pressure, take away the uncertainty, take away the fear, take away the waiting, take away this season, change the situation, open the door, fix the problem, make it stop. Those prayers are honest, they're real. And God is not offended by honest prayers. He already knows what you're feeling, already sees your frustration. He already understands your exhaustion. The challenge comes when the answer doesn't arrive as quickly as we hoped. Because most of us expect God to remove the burden immediately. We expect the door to open, and we expect the breakthrough to come. We expect the problem to disappear. And sometimes it does. Sometimes God moves quickly. Sometimes miracles happen suddenly. Sometimes prayers are answered in remarkable ways. But other times the burden remains. A season continues. The long waiting stretches longer than expected. And that's where confusion begins. There's a couple things I've lost recently, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you. Can be ever lost if God can remove it. Some things in your life. I'd be like, why am I still carrying this? If God hears my prayers, why hasn't anything changed? Those questions are not new. Believers have wrestled with them for generations. In fact, many of God's most faithful servants experienced the same thing. Joseph prayed in prison, but he remained there for years. David was anointed king, but he spent years running for his life. Moses spent decades in obscurity before stepping into his assignment. Abraham waited years for promises to be fulfilled. Again and again, and Scripture shows us something important. God often changes the person before he changes the situation. That truth can be difficult to accept, especially when the burden feels heavy, especially when the waiting feels endless, especially when you're desperate for relief. But God sees something we often miss. We focus on the destination. God focuses on development. We focus on the blessing. God focuses on the person who will carry the blessing. We focus on what we want. God focuses on who we need to become. Imagine giving enormous influence to someone who lacks character. Imagine giving great success to someone who lacks humility. And imagine giving tremendous opportunity to someone who lacks wisdom. The blessing itself could become destructive because the blessing is bad, because the person is unprepared. That is why God often prioritizes transformation before promotion, strength before influence, depth before visibility. Many of us ask God for larger opportunities. And while God is building a stronger foundation, many of us ask for greater influence. Meanwhile, God is developing greater integrity. Many of us ask for immediate breakthrough. Meanwhile, God is preparing us to sustain what we're praying for. There's a couple of things I've lost recently, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you. Couple of things, our large building requires a deep foundation. The higher the structure, the deeper the preparation, the greater the calling, the greater the development, and the larger the assignment. The stronger the character must become. That preparation process is rarely comfortable. It stretches us, it challenges us, it exposes weaknesses, it reveals insecurities. It uncovers areas where growth is still needed. And while those moments can feel frustrating, they are often evidence that God is actively working. Think about the lessons you've learned during difficult seasons. Patience, trust, perseverance, faithfulness, dependence on God. Many of those qualities would never have developed the same way through comfort. They were forged through waiting, forged through uncertainty, lost brushed reminders, forged through surrender. Sometimes we ask God to remove the burden when he is using the burden to build strength. Things we ask him to shorten the journey when he is developing endurance. Sometimes we ask him to change our circumstances while he is changing us. And one day, often much later, we begin to see what he was doing.
Yes.
We realize that what felt like delay was often preparation.
Yes.
Felt like silence was often development. Felt like unanswered prayer was often God working beneath the surface. I think it's a very simple question, but one that I think is very simple question. You asked him to remove the burden most recently, and I'm going to see if it'll bless you. You asked him to change the situation. Instead, he transformed your character. Important, you asked him for immediate relief. Instead, he prepared you for lasting purpose. He can very see if it'll bless you. And when you look back, you realize something remarkable. The greatest miracle wasn't simply that circumstances changed. The greatest miracle was the person you became while waiting. Because before God entrusted you with greater influence, he needed to build greater strength. Before he expanded your assignment, he expanded your capacity. Before he opened the next door, he prepared you to walk through it. And what it felt like delay was actually preparation all along. There is something fascinating about breakthrough. Most of us spend years imagining what it will look like. Mind up or lost, reimagine the phone call. Suddenly the answered prayer, the healed relationship, the financial miracle, the open door, the dramatic moment when everything finally changes. We picture ourselves standing on the other side of the struggle, looking back with gratitude and relief. Sometimes breakthrough does arrive that way. Sometimes God moves suddenly. Sometimes the answer comes unexpected. Sometimes the situation changes overnight. But often, the breakthrough we desperately prayed for arrives differently than we imagined. Sometimes it arrives so quietly that we almost miss it, because many of God's greatest breakthroughs begin inside us long before they appear around us. That truth is easy to overlook when you're focused on external circumstances. When you've been praying for a situation to change, your attention naturally stays fixed on the situation. You keep watching the door. You keep watching the problem. You keep watching the circumstance. You keep waiting for visible evidence that God is moving. Then while God is already working, not around you first, within you, and perhaps that is the most important transformation of all. Have you ever noticed how certain struggles lose their power over you with time? But not because the struggle disappears, because you become different. There may have been a season when fear controlled every decision you made. They'd be able to bless you. You worried constantly, and you imagined worst-case scenario, sleep over things you couldn't control. You carried anxiety everywhere you went. Then one day you realized something had changed. That circumstances weren't necessarily better, but your perspective was. Faith was. Your confidence was. You still faced uncertainty. But uncertainty no longer ruled your life. That was breakthrough. There was a time when rejection defined you. Every other loss recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. I'ma list a couple things I've lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. I'ma list a couple things I've lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. I'ma list a couple things I've lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. I'ma list a couple things I've lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. I'ma list a couple things I've lost recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. I'ma list every other loss amidst inborn, it felt personal. Every closed door felt like proof that you weren't enough. Then slowly through God's healing process, recently, and I'ma see if it'll bless you. You stop measuring your worth through other people's opinions, allowing rejection to determine your value. You stop seeking validation from places that could never truly satisfy. There was breakthrough. But perhaps there was a season when bitterness lived in your heart. You replayed painful memories of things in your life. You carried resentment, carried wounds that refused to heal. Then somehow God begins softening your heart. Not instantly, not easily, but gradually. You learn to forgive. You learn to release the hurt. You learn to trust God with justice. Shine and breakthrough. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that the burden disappears. The greatest miracle is that the burden no longer controls you. Because internal freedom often comes before external change. And internal freedom is a powerful thing. A person can still face challenges while walking in peace. Thoughts can still experience uncertainty while living with hope. A person can still be waiting while trusting God completely. So the transformation cannot be purchased. It cannot be manufactured. It is developed through the process. It is developed through the very seasons we once prayed would end. Many people don't realize that God is often doing two things at the same time. He is preparing the blessing, and He is preparing the person who will receive it. Both matter. Imagine receiving everything you've prayed for without becoming the person capable of handling it. Imagine stepping into your calling without the wisdom necessary to sustain it. Imagine receiving influence without the character needed to manage it. The blessing might arrive, but it would not last. That is why God cares so much about internal growth. Because what He wants to do through your life requires more than opportunity. It requires maturity. It requires wisdom. It requires faith. It requires strength. And those qualities are developed through the process. Think about Joseph. Most people celebrate the day Joseph became ruler in Egypt. The palace, The authority, the influence, the fulfillment of the dream. But Joseph's true breakthrough happened long before he entered the palace. It happened when bitterness failed to take root in his heart. It happened when he remained faithful in prison. It happened when he continued trusting God despite betrayal. The promotion was visible. Breakthrough had already begun years earlier. The same was true for David. People remember the crown. People remember the throne. People remember the victories. But David's breakthrough began in lonely places. It began while tending sheep. It began while hiding in caves. It began while learning to depend completely on God. Ground simply revealed what God had already developed. And what about Esther? People celebrate the moment she stood before the king. Courage, the boldness, the influence. But courage doesn't appear suddenly. Courage is developed through smaller moments of faithfulness, through hidden seasons, through difficult choices, through trusting God when the future remains uncertain. Long before Esther stepped into her assignment, God was preparing her heart. Again and again, the pattern remains the same. Breakthrough begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Victory begins in the heart before it appears in life. Transformation begins beneath the surface before anyone else notices it. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you've been waiting for a dramatic sign, a dramatic answer, a dramatic change. Meanwhile, God has already begun transforming you. Perhaps your faith is stronger than it was a year ago. Perhaps your perspective is healthier than it was before. But your prayer life is deeper. Perhaps your trust is stronger. Perhaps your identity is more secure. If dependence on God has increased, perhaps your heart has become more compassionate. Those changes matter. In fact, they may be the very evidence that breakthrough has already started. Because the truth is, and one day, when the answer finally arrives, you'll be lost in one new page come out some burden didn't disappear first. And I'ma see if it'll bless you. Can be one a change. Let's return to the question that brought us here. The most frustrating things in your life. Have you ever lost quite in difficult seasons? The question whispered through tears. The question carried through sleepless nights. The question repeated during years of waiting. Why did God allow me to carry so much? Why was the burden so heavy? Why was the journey so difficult? Why did the struggle last so long? If you've ever asked those questions, you're not alone. Countless believers have wrestled with them. Be faithful people, strong people, that people who love God deeply, being Him, putting Him, trusting Him, even when life stopped making sense. And perhaps now, after walking through this journey together, we can begin seeing those questions from a different perspective. Because all the pain suddenly makes sense. And I'm gonna see if a mystery has been solved. Because every wound has fully healed. But because we can now recognize something we may have missed before. The burden was never the whole story. There was something happening beneath the burden. Something deeper, something eternal. Something God was building while you were focused on surviving. You want to be fun, then God saw something in you that you couldn't yet see in yourself. Maybe you saw strength hidden beneath your fear. Maybe you saw wisdom hidden beneath your confusion. Maybe you saw purpose hidden beneath your pain. Maybe you saw a future version of you that required preparation. Because that's what God has always done. Throughout Scripture, He consistently saw more in people than they saw in themselves. When Moses saw a failure, God saw a deliverer. When David saw a shepherd boy, God saw a king. When Joseph saw a prison cell, God saw a future leader. When Esther saw uncertainty, God saw influence. When Peter saw weakness, God saw a preacher who would help change the world. God has always been able to see beyond the present moment. He sees beyond the struggle, beyond the disappointment, beyond the waiting. And perhaps He sees something extraordinary in you as well. Perhaps He sees what your current circumstances cannot reveal. Because the burden has been accomplishing more than you realized. It strengthened your faith. Not the kind of faith that only survives easy seasons. The kind of faith that survives storms. The kind of faith that survives disappointment. The kind of faith that survives unanswered questions. The burden revealed your identity. It stripped away false sources of confidence, flushed places where you had attached your worth to temporary things. It taught you that your value comes from God, that circumstances had developed your character. Patience grew, humility grew, understanding grew, wisdom grew, endurance grew. You became stronger than you realized. You became deeper than you realized. You became more prepared than you realized. The burden also revealed your calling. And I'm gonna see that it bless you. That these struggles you've endured have given you insight that others need. The lessons you've learned have become wisdom that others can benefit from. The comfort God gave you can now become comfort you offer to someone else. The healing you've received can become hope for another person. Nothing was wasted. Not the tears, not the waiting, not the disappointment, not the loneliness, not the confusion, not even the seasons that nearly broke you. Him waste nothing when it is surrendered to Him. That does not mean every painful experience was good. Parting pain is still painful. Is still loss. Heartbreak is still heartbreak. God and we do not pretend suffering is enjoyable. God will not pretend difficult seasons are easy. But we do believe something powerful. We believe God is able to redeem what He allows. We believe He can bring beauty from ashes. We believe He can bring purpose from pain. We believe He can bring strength from weakness. Bless you. He can bring hope from despair. We believe He can bring calling from struggle. That is why your story is not over. Things I've lost, no matter how difficult this season has been, no matter how long the waiting has lasted, no matter how heavy the burden has felt. This is not the end. God is still writing, still working. God is still preparing. God is still transforming. And maybe the most important question is no longer, why is this happening to me? Things I've lost recently, and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Have you ever lost the most end on cold question? Is God preparing me for? That question changes everything. Because it shifts your focus away from frustration and toward purpose. Away from hopelessness and toward expectation. Away from victimhood and toward growth. From merely surviving and toward becoming. So if you're tired today, see me and I'm gonna see if it'll bless you. Can be one of the most frustrating things in your life. Keep trusting. If you're waiting today, keep believing. If you're carrying a burden today, I'm gonna list a couple things I've lost days. Don't assume it is meaningless. Because one day you will look back. One day you'll see what God was doing. One day you'll understand lessons that seem confusing right now. One day you'll recognize how faithfully He was guiding you, even when you couldn't see His hand. And when that day comes, you may discover something that seems impossible to believe today. The season that almost broke you was the season that revealed your purpose. The burden that made you question everything. It was developing strength you didn't know you possessed. The struggle that brought you to your knees was bringing you closer to God than ever before. And what felt like your greatest burden was actually God's preparation for your greatest victory. Whether we ever lost, never wasted. Your tears were never ignored. Pain was never meaningless. And your purpose is still unfolding.